This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
The wind howled on a blustery Friday night in March, rattling the windows of a modest house in Blunderstone, Suffolk. It was on this tumultuous evening that a child named David Copperfield was born to Clara Copperfield, a young and beautiful widow. Clara cradled her newborn son, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of joy and sorrow. The candlelight flickered across her face, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mirror the conflicting emotions within her. Just 6 months prior, she had lost her husband, David Copperfield Sr., leaving her to face motherhood alone and in precarious financial circumstances. Yet as she gazed upon her baby's face, his tiny fingers curling around hers, a flicker of hope ignited in her heart. By Clara's side stood Clara Peggotty, a stout woman with hands roughened by years of hard work. Her weathered fingers, testament to her dedication, gently stroked the baby's cheek. Peggotty had been the Copperfield family's loyal servant for years, and now in the absence of a father figure, she stepped into the role of a second mother to young David. Her eyes, warm and kind, met Clara's, silently promising unwavering support in the journey ahead. As David grew, the small cottage in Blunderstone became a haven of love and warmth. The garden, with its riot of colorful flowers and buzzing bees, became his playground. The sweet scent of roses mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, creating a sensory wonderland for the young boy. Here, under the watchful eyes of his mother and Peggotty, David would chase butterflies and create imaginary worlds, his laughter echoing through the air like wind chimes. Inside the house, evenings were a cozy affair. The living room, though small, seemed to expand with the love that filled it. Clara would sit by the window, her nimble fingers working on her sewing as she hummed soft lullabies. The melody would intertwine with the rhythmic click-clack of Peggotty's knitting needles as she darned socks by the firelight. The flames cast a warm, golden glow across the room, making shadows dance on the walls like playful spirits. Young David would often curl up on the worn rug, its familiar texture comforting against his skin, his eyes heavy with sleep but fighting to stay awake, not wanting to miss a moment of this peaceful scene. Sundays brought a change to their routine. Dressed in their best, the trio would make their way to the village church. The walk itself was an adventure for David, who marveled at the changing seasons reflected in the hedgerows and fields they passed. The crunch of gravel under their feet, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant tolling of church bells created a symphony of Sunday morning sounds. Inside the church, as the vicar's words washed over the congregation like a gentle tide, David would often drift off to sleep, his head nestled in his mother's lap. The scent of her lavender sachet would mingle with the musty odor of old hymn books, creating a unique fragrance that would forever remind David of safety and love. As the years passed, David's quick mind began to shine. Clara, recognizing her son's potential, took it upon herself to teach him his letters and numbers. Their lessons often took place in the garden, with David tracing letters in the dirt with a stick, while his mother patiently guided his hand. The cool earth beneath his fingers, the warmth of the sun on his back, and the gentle encouragement of his mother's voice created a perfect learning environment. Each successfully learned letter or solved sum was celebrated with a sweet treat from Peggotty's kitchen, the sugary taste reinforcing David's love for learning. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic childhood, there lurked the constant shadow of financial worry. Clara and Peggotty worked tirelessly to shield David from these concerns, their love forming a protective bubble around him. They mended and remade clothes, the soft swish of fabric and the quiet snip of scissors, a lullaby of frugality. They stretched meals, finding creative ways to make simple ingredients taste like feasts. In all this, they found joy in simple pleasures, all to ensure that David's world remained untouched by the harsh realities that lay beyond their little cottage. As David grew, his world expanded, but it remained centered around the loving figures of his mother and Peggotty. Their unconditional love was like a fortress, protecting him from the hardships they faced. In this cocoon of affection, young David Copperfield's character was being shaped, his heart filled with kindness and his mind with wonder. But as the sun set on another day in Blunderstone, casting long shadows across the garden where David played, a change was brewing on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of impending rain and whispers of a future that would soon shatter the tranquility of David's childhood. Little did he know that his world was about to be turned upside down, as a new chapter in his life was poised to begin. David's idyllic childhood came to an abrupt end. His mother remarried Mr. Edward Murdstone, a stern and cruel man who would change everything. The day Murdstone arrived, a chill settled over the Copperfield home like a heavy fog. The warm golden light that once filled the room seemed to dim, replaced by long, creeping shadows. David watched, his heart sinking, as his mother's smile faded and her eyes grew wary. Murdstone's voice, low and menacing, filled the air like thunder. "There will be order in this house," he declared, his dark eyes glinting. David felt his world shrinking, the walls of his once happy home closing in around him. Clara, once the picture of maternal affection, now moved about like a frightened bird. Her hands, which used to ruffle David's hair so lovingly, now fluttered nervously at her sides. When she did reach out to touch her son's cheek, Murdstone's sharp rebuke cut through the air. "You'll spoil the boy," he'd growl, and Clara's hand would fall away, leaving David aching for the comfort he once knew so well. The arrival of Murdstone's sister Jane only deepened the gloom. She swept in like a winter wind, her severe expression matching her brother's. Between them, they turned the cheerful home into a fortress of misery. David felt like a prisoner, the tick of the clock on the mantel marking time in his sentence. Lessons became a daily torment. Murdstone loomed over David, his presence as suffocating as a thick, dark cloak. The boy's pencil trembled in his hand, leaving shaky lines that looked more like the tracks of a frightened animal than proper writing. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and heavy with tension. One fateful day, as David struggled with a particularly difficult sum, the tension snapped like an overstretched rubber band. Murdstone's patience, always in short supply, evaporated. With a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house, he seized his cane. The first strike left David breathless, pain exploding across his back. Crack, crack, crack. Each blow fell like lightning, searing into his flesh. By the time Murdstone finished, David lay curled on the floor, his body racked with sobs, his spirit shattered like a delicate china cup dashed against stone. Clara burst into the room, her face pale as milk. But even as she reached for her son, Murdstone's cold voice froze her in place. "The boy needed discipline," he said as casually as if commenting on the weather. Clara, her will bent and broken, could only nod weakly, her eyes filled with unshed tears. From that day forward, David moved through his own home like a ghost. Every creak of the floorboards set his heart racing. His shoulders hunched, trying to make himself invisible. The once bright rooms now felt like a maze of shadows, with Murdstone's dark eyes lurking around every corner. Peggotty, dear, kind Peggotty, tried her best to offer comfort, but her influence had waned, reduced to furtive smiles and quick reassuring touches when Murdstone's back was turned. Her once booming laugh, which used to fill the kitchen with warmth, was now barely more than a whisper, like the last ember of a dying fire. As days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, David felt the weight of his new reality settling upon him like a heavy, smothering blanket. The constant criticism, the emotional coldness, the ever-present threat of Murdstone's wrath, it all began to chip away at the bright, curious boy he once was. In quiet moments, alone in his room, David would close his eyes and try to remember the feeling of his mother's unrestricted embrace, the sound of her laughter mixing with his own. But those memories grew fainter with each passing day, like footprints washed away by the tide. David's spirit, once as boundless as the sea he loved to watch from his window, began to crack under the constant pressure. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a wariness that no child should have to carry. As he lay in bed each night, listening to the oppressive silence of the house, David couldn't help but feel that this dark turning point in his young life was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. One morning, after another tense and silent breakfast, Murdstone's voice cut through the air like a knife. "It's time for a change, boy," he said, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Pack your things. Tomorrow, you leave for school." David's heart raced as he climbed the stairs to his room, his mind whirling with fear and uncertainty. What kind of school would Murdstone choose? As he reached for his small suitcase, a chill ran down his spine. Something told him that whatever lay ahead would make even Murdstone's harsh rule seem like a distant memory. The iron gates of Salem House loomed before David. Their rusty hinges creaked ominously as he passed through, sending a shiver down his spine. The gray stone building seemed to absorb what little sunlight filtered through the overcast sky, casting long shadows across the barren courtyard. David's heart pounded in his chest as he approached, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing structure. The moment David arrived, his humiliation began. A weathered sign was thrust into his hands. The words, "Beware, he bites," crudely painted across its surface. With trembling fingers, he hung it around his neck. The rough wood scratched against his skin, a constant reminder of his newfound shame. The jeers and taunts of his new classmates pierced the air, their laughter cutting deeper than any physical blow. "Look at the new boy," one voice sneered. "Careful, he might bite you," another chimed in, followed by a chorus of cruel giggles. David's cheeks burned with embarrassment as he made his way to the dormitory, his eyes fixed on the ground to avoid meeting the mocking gazes of his peers. The conditions at Salem House were nothing short of deplorable. As David stepped into the dormitory, the stench of unwashed bodies and moldy bedding assaulted his nostrils. He fought the urge to gag, his stomach churning with a mixture of disgust and despair. Meals were a sorry affair, with watery gruel that tasted of dishwater and bread so stale it could chip a tooth. David's stomach growled constantly, a painful reminder of the meager sustenance that barely kept the growing boys alive. Education seemed an afterthought at Salem House. Most of the day was devoted to avoiding Mr. Creakle's wrath in his ever-present cane. The sharp crack of wood against flesh echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of the punishment that awaited any misstep. Yet even in this bleak environment, David found unexpected rays of light. James Steerforth, a boy as charming as he was confident, took notice of the newcomer. Steerforth's easy smile and protective nature drew David like a moth to a flame. In Steerforth's presence, the dreary walls of Salem House seemed to fade away, replaced by tales of adventure and dreams of a brighter future. "Come now, Copperfield," Steerforth would say, his arm draped casually over David's shoulders. The warmth of his touch was a stark contrast to the cold, unforgiving atmosphere of the school. "Don't let these dullards get you down. You're made of sterner stuff, I can tell." David basked in Steerforth's attention, his admiration growing with each passing day. Steerforth's effortless charm and quick wit made him seem larger than life, a beacon of hope in the oppressive gloom of Salem House. But it wasn't just Steerforth who offered David solace. Tommy Traddles, with his unruly mop of curly hair and infectious grin, became a steadfast friend. Where Steerforth was all flash and bravado, Traddles was a quiet source of strength and good humor. "Look here, David," Traddles would whisper during particularly dull lessons, hunched over his slate. With a few quick strokes of his chalk, a comical skeleton would appear, its bony arms waving in silent protest of their dreary surroundings. David would stifle a laugh, the tension in his shoulders easing for a moment as he shared in this small act of rebellion. Together, the three boys formed an unlikely alliance against the harsh realities of Salem House. They huddled together during Mr. Creakle's rampages, offering silent support as the cane whistled through the air. The sound of its striking flesh made David's stomach turn, but the presence of his friends gave him the strength to endure. They shared meager rations, making games out of who could make their portion last the longest. In stolen moments between lessons and chores, they spun elaborate tales of the lives they'd lead once free of Salem House's oppressive walls. David could almost taste the freedom they described, feel the warmth of the sun on his face as they imagined adventures far beyond the school's gloomy confines. Despite the poor quality of instruction, David found himself excelling in his studies. Words became his refuge, each new book a doorway to worlds beyond the grim reality of his daily life. He lost himself in the rhythms of poetry and the sweeping narratives of history, his mind soaring even as his body remained trapped within Salem House. As the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, David found an odd sort of rhythm to life at Salem House. The initial shock of his circumstances gave way to a grim determination. He learned to navigate the treacherous waters of Mr. Creakle's temper, to find moments of joy in Traddles' silly drawings, and to bask in the reflected glory of Steerforth's charisma. Yet even as he adapted, David never forgot the injustice that had brought him to this place. The memory of his mother's tears and Mr. Murdstone's cruel smile fueled a quiet fire within him. He vowed that one day he would rise above these circumstances and create a life worthy of the friends who had stood by him in his darkest hours. As winter gave way to spring and the iron grip of Salem House began to loosen ever so slightly, David reflected on the unexpected lessons he had learned. The value of true friendship, the power of perseverance, and the strength found in shared adversity had become as much a part of his education as any book learning. These bonds forged in the crucible of Salem House would shape David long after he left its gloomy halls behind, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in even the bleakest of circumstances. One crisp morning, as David sat by the window watching the first buds of spring emerge on the trees outside, a messenger arrived at Salem House. The boy's face was grave as he handed a sealed letter to Mr. Creakle. David felt a sudden chill, an inexplicable sense of dread washing over him as Mr. Creakle's eyes darted to where he sat. The headmaster's face, usually twisted in a scowl, now bore an expression David had never seen before, something akin to pity. As Mr. Creakle approached, letter in hand, David's heart began to race. What news could possibly soften the heart of such a cruel man? And why did he have the sinking feeling that his world was about to change forever? The news of his mother's death struck David like a thunderbolt. In an instant, his world shattered, leaving him truly alone and adrift in a sea of grief and uncertainty. The air around him seemed to thicken, making each breath a struggle as the weight of his loss pressed down upon his small shoulders. With leaden feet and a heart heavy as stone, David made the somber journey back to his childhood home. The once familiar rooms now felt like a stranger's house, cold and unwelcoming. The absence of his mother's warmth echoed in every corner, amplifying the hollow ache in his chest. As if fate hadn't been cruel enough, he learned that his newborn half-brother had also passed away, a fragile life snuffed out before it had truly begun. The Murdstones, their faces as unyielding as granite, regarded David with eyes as hard and unfeeling as flint. Not a flicker of compassion crossed their features for the boy's overwhelming loss. Their words, sharp and cutting, fell on David's ears like icy rain as they swiftly arranged for him to be sent to London, to work in their family's wine warehouse. At the tender age of 10, David found himself thrust into a world as bitter as the dregs of the wine he now bottled. The warehouse loomed before him, a dark, oppressive structure that seemed to swallow the light. Its weathered bricks and grimy windows spoke of countless souls ground down by hard labor and crushed dreams. Inside, the air hung thick with the musty scent of old wood and spilled wine. The constant clink of glass bottles and the gruff voices of men created a cacophony that assaulted David's senses. His small hands, once meant for holding books and pencils, now grasped bottles and corks. The work was relentless, a never-ending stream of tasks that left his fingers raw and his back aching. Around him, rough men and boys moved like automatons, their spirits as dulled as the grimy windows that let in weak streams of daylight. In this new life of hardship, David found an unlikely haven with the Micawber family. Mr. Wilkins Micawber, a man whose optimism seemed to defy the very laws of nature, took David under his wing. With a booming voice that filled the room and a twinkle in his eye that sparkled even in the dimmest light, Mr. Micawber would declare, "Something will turn up, my boy." His words rang out like a bell of hope, even as creditors knocked at their door with increasing frequency. The Micawber home was a chaotic whirlwind of financial crises and impromptu speeches. Mrs. Micawber, her face lined with worry but her chin held high, somehow managed to keep the family afloat in a sea of debt. Her eyes, though tired, held a fierce determination that David couldn't help but admire. The Micawber children, wide-eyed and curious, watched the world around them with a mixture of bewilderment and hope. their laughter a rare bright spot in David's otherwise gloomy existence. For David, each day became a test of endurance. His wages, a pitiful sum that barely kept him fed, jingled in his pocket like a cruel joke. More often than not, hunger gnawed at his belly, a constant companion that made the long hours feel even longer. The memory of his former life, of books and learning, and the promise of a bright future, faded like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only a vague sense of loss. Yet even in the depths of his despair, something within David began to stir. Like a seedling pushing through unyielding soil, his resilience began to take root. He watched, he learned, he adapted. The harsh realities of the adult world, once so alien and frightening, slowly became familiar territory. He began to notice the subtle kindnesses exchanged between the roughest of men, the quiet dignity of those ground down by poverty but not defeated. In the dim light of the warehouse, amidst the clatter of bottles and the shouts of workers, David's eyes began to see beyond his immediate surroundings. He observed the way light caught the dust motes floating in the air, creating fleeting moments of beauty in the gloom. He listened to the stories shared by his fellow workers during brief respites, tales of dreams deferred but not abandoned. As days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, David found himself changing. The soft edges of childhood were being worn away, replaced by a harder, more resilient shell. Yet beneath this new exterior, the essence of who he was, his curiosity, his compassion, his quiet determination, remained intact, like a precious gem hidden beneath layers of rough stone. In the face of adversity, David's spirit, like a flame sheltered from the wind, continued to burn. Though his dreams of education and a better life seemed distant, they were not extinguished. Instead, they smoldered, waiting for the moment when they could once again burst into life. For now, he focused on survival, on learning the harsh lessons of the world around him, his resilience growing stronger with each passing day. As the sun set on another grueling day at the warehouse, David trudged back to his lodgings, his body aching and his mind weary. The streets of London, once so intimidating, now felt almost familiar. But as he climbed the creaky stairs to his small, drafty room, a sudden, overwhelming wave of despair washed over him. The weight of his circumstances, the relentless grind of his daily existence, and the seemingly insurmountable obstacles before him all came crashing down at once. David's hands trembled as he fumbled with the door key, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. In that moment, he realized that something had to change. He couldn't go on like this. But what could he do? Where could he turn? As he collapsed onto his thin mattress, his mind raced with desperate thoughts, each more wild than the last. Something had to give, and soon, David Copperfield's life had become unbearable. He could no longer endure the miserable circumstances that surrounded him. The grimy walls of London seemed to close in, suffocating his dreams and crushing his spirit. With each passing day, the weight of his despair grew heavier, until finally, in a moment of desperate clarity, he made a decision that would alter the course of his young life forever. He would flee. He would seek out his only living relative, his great-aunt Betsy Trotwood, in Dover. The very thought sent a shiver of excitement down David's spine, mingled with a cold tendril of fear. He had never met this woman, this last tenuous link to family. What if she turned him away? But the alternative, staying in this life of drudgery and abuse, was unthinkable. With trembling hands, David gathered his meager possessions. A handful of coins jingled in his pocket, a pitiful sum that represented his entire worldly wealth. The threadbare clothes on his back were his only armor against the world. As he stepped out onto the cobblestone streets, the familiar sights of London took on a sinister aspect. The towering buildings loomed over him like prison walls, their windows staring down accusingly. David's heart pounded in his chest as he took his first steps away from the life he knew. The thrill of freedom warred with the gnawing fear of the unknown. The road stretched out before him, a ribbon of uncertainty disappearing into the horizon. Each step took him further from the cruel warehouse that had been his prison and closer to an uncertain future. The sun beat down mercilessly as David trudged along the dusty road. Sweat trickled down his back, and his throat burned with thirst. The dust of the road clung to his skin and clothes, a constant reminder of the miles he had yet to travel. As the day wore on, hunger became his constant companion, gnawing at his insides like a relentless beast. David's meager coins dwindled rapidly, forcing him to make impossible choices. With a lump in his throat, he parted with his jacket, trading it for a morsel of food that barely quieted the rumbling in his stomach. The loss of this small comfort left him feeling more vulnerable than ever. As darkness fell, David faced a new challenge, finding shelter for the night. He sought refuge wherever he could, beneath prickly hedgerows that scratched his skin, or in open fields where the damp grass soaked through his clothes. The stars above seemed to mock his plight, twinkling indifferently as he shivered in the cold. Every rustle in the darkness sent his heart racing, fear of discovery keeping him from true rest. Days blurred together, marked only by the endless rhythm of his footsteps and the gradual wearing down of his body and spirit. His feet, once soft and uncalloused, became raw and blistered. Each step was an agony, yet David pressed on, driven by a desperate hope that burned like a tiny flame in his chest. The thought of his great aunt, a woman he had never met but who represented his last chance at a better life, became a beacon guiding him through his darkest moments. In his mind, Betsy Trotwood took on almost mythical proportions, a stern but kind-hearted savior who would sweep him up in her arms and make everything right. At last, after what felt like an eternity of walking, a new scent filled David's nostrils, the salty tang of sea air. His heart leaped in his chest. Dover! He was close, so close to his goal. The town rose before him like a mirage, its buildings wavering in the heat haze. David's feet, blistered and aching, carried him through unfamiliar streets as he searched for his aunt's cottage. When he finally stood before Betsy Trotwood's door, David was a pitiful sight. His clothes hung in tatters, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Gathering what little courage remained, he raised a trembling hand to knock. The sound echoed in his ears like a thunderclap. For a moment there was silence. Then, the creak of floorboards, the rattle of a latch, and suddenly the door swung open. David found himself face to face with a stern-faced woman whose eyes widened in shock at the sight before her. Betsy Trotwood, the great aunt who had abandoned him at birth out of disappointment that he wasn't a girl, now stood frozen, her expression unreadable. "Please," David croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse and desperation. "I'm David Copperfield, your great-nephew. I have nowhere else to go." For a moment that stretched like eternity, Betsy stood motionless. Then, almost imperceptibly, her features softened. Something in David's earnest plea, or perhaps in the depths of his weary eyes, had touched a chord within her. With a brisk nod, Betsy ushered David inside. "Trotwood," she declared, bestowing upon him a new name, along with a chance at a new life. "Trotwood Copperfield. That's what we'll call you." As the door closed behind him, David felt a weight lift from his shoulders. In that moment, as his great-aunt began to fuss over his bedraggled state, he knew that his fortunes had turned. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, David dared to hope for a brighter future. That night, as David lay in a real bed for the first time in weeks, his mind raced with possibilities. What would tomorrow bring? As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen, something that would change the course of his life forever. Little did David know that at that very moment, Betsy Trotwood was pacing in her study, a determined glint in her eye. She had made a decision, one that would set in motion a chain of events that would shape David's destiny in ways he could never have imagined. Betsy Trotwood had made up her mind. She was determined to give David a proper education, and so she sent him to a respectable school in Canterbury. The cobblestone streets of Canterbury welcomed David like old friends, their winding paths whispering promises of new beginnings. As he stepped off the carriage, his legs wobbling from the long journey, the aroma of freshly baked bread danced on the breeze, mingling with the earthy scent of rain-soaked grass. His heart hammered against his ribs, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through his veins as he approached Mr. Wickfield's house, his home for the coming years. The door creaked open, revealing Mr. Wickfield, a kind-faced man with worry lines etched so deeply into his forehead they seemed to tell stories of their own. His warm smile, tinged with a hint of sadness, greeted David. The slight tremor in Mr. Wickfield's hand as he ushered the boy inside spoke volumes about his inner struggles, louder than any words could. Stepping into the house felt like entering another world. Grand yet somehow melancholic, with dark wood paneling that seemed to absorb the light and heavy curtains that cast long, reaching shadows. The air hung thick with the musty smell of old books and polished wood, a scent that would soon become as familiar to David as his own name. It was in this somber atmosphere that David first laid eyes on Agnes, Mr. Wickfield's daughter. She emerged from the shadows like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds, her gentle smile instantly melting the ice of David's nervousness. Agnes, with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years and a presence that calmed like a lullaby, quickly became David's anchor in this new world. Her laughter, soft and melodious, filled the house with warmth, chasing away the lingering gloom like a broom sweeping away cobwebs. As days melted into weeks, David found himself thriving under the guidance of Dr. Strong, the benevolent headmaster of his new school. The classroom became his sanctuary, a place where his mind could soar free from the chains of his troubled past. Words danced on the pages of his books, alive and vibrant, while languages rolled off his tongue with increasing fluency. It was as if a door had been unlocked in his mind, revealing a world of knowledge as vast and exciting as the ocean. David's classmates, at first as intimidating as a pack of wolves, soon became his pack. Their shared laughter echoed through the school halls, a stark contrast to the lonely silence that had once been David's constant companion. With each passing day, the weight of his past seemed to lift a little more, replaced by the buoyancy of newfound confidence and camaraderie. Yet even as David basked in the warmth of his new life, a chill crept into his heart whenever Uriah Heep was near. Mr. Wickfield's clerk, with his exaggerated humility and hands as clammy as dead fish, set David's teeth on edge. Heap's very presence seemed to suck the joy out of a room, his obsequious manner as unsettling as a spider's web, brushing against bare skin in the dark. David couldn't shake the feeling that behind Heap's simpering smile lurked a cunning mind, calculating and ambitious, like a predator waiting to pounce. As the seasons changed and Canterbury streets transformed from sun-dappled to frost-covered, David felt himself changing too. The timid boy who had arrived on that first day was slowly giving way to a young man filled with purpose and potential. His experiences in Canterbury were shaping him, molding him like clay on a potter's wheel, each turn bringing him closer to the man he was meant to be. Yet even as David reveled in his growth and newfound happiness, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was amiss. The seeds of future conflicts had been sown in his interactions with Uriah Heep, and they lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to sprout. As David settled into his new life, healing from his earlier hardships and growing into a confident and capable young man, he remained unaware of the challenges that lay ahead, challenges that would test the very foundations of the life he was building in Canterbury. As the final days of his education approached, a bittersweet feeling settled over David. He stood at the window of his room in Mr. Wickfield's house, watching the sun set over the Canterbury rooftops. The sky blazed with oranges and pinks, as if bidding him a spectacular farewell. His heart swelled with gratitude for all he had learned and experienced, yet a tremor of uncertainty rippled through him. What lay beyond these familiar streets? What challenges awaited him in the vast, unknown world of adulthood? David's fingers traced the worn edges of a letter on his desk, an offer of apprenticeship in London. The paper felt heavy in his hands, weighted with the promise of a new chapter in his life. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle over Canterbury, David couldn't help but wonder, was he ready for what lay ahead? And would the shadows that lurked in the corners of his past finally catch up with him in the bustling streets of London? David's education had come to an end. A new chapter of his life was about to unfold as he prepared to embark on his professional journey as an apprentice proctor in London. The young man's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as he stepped off the carriage onto the cobblestone streets of the bustling metropolis. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and horse manure, a far cry from the crisp country air he'd grown accustomed to. All around him, the city pulsed with life. Street vendors hawking their wares, horse-drawn carriages clattering by, and throngs of people hurrying about their business. David found himself a set of modest rooms, rented from Mrs. Krupp, a well-meaning but somewhat overbearing landlady. Her motherly fussing both comforted and exasperated him, reminding him of the delicate balance between independence and the need for human connection. As he settled into his new life, David felt like a small boat on a vast ocean. Some days he rode high on the waves of his small successes, deciphering legal jargon or navigating the unwritten rules of London society. Other days he felt tossed about by uncertainty, questioning his place in this grand, indifferent city. Old friendships provided an anchor in this sea of change. Tommy Traddles, his former schoolmate now studying law, became a frequent visitor. Their conversations, filled with shared memories and dreams of the future, were like warm hearths in the cold vastness of city life. Under Mr. Spenlow's watchful eye, David's career began to take shape. Each solved case was a piece in the complex puzzle of legal practice, bringing with it a sense of accomplishment and growth. The young apprentice threw himself into his work, his quill flying across pages late into the night as he took on extra duties as a parliamentary reporter. But life in London wasn't all work and no play. David's social circle expanded, introducing him to a kaleidoscope of characters that made up the city's vibrant society. Dinner parties glittered with witty conversation, theater outings filled his senses with drama and music, and casual gatherings in smoky taverns painted his evenings with laughter and camaraderie. Then, like a bolt of lightning on a clear day, love struck David's heart. Dora Spenlow, Mr. Spenlow's daughter, entered his life in a whirlwind of golden curls and tinkling laughter. She was a vision of beauty, her childlike charm and vivacity captivating David completely. Her presence made the world brighter, as if she carried sunshine wherever she went. David's infatuation with Dora consumed his thoughts. He penned poetry that compared her eyes to stars, and her smile to the first blooms of spring. Any excuse to visit the Spenlow home became a treasure hunt for glimpses of his beloved. The mere sight of her across a crowded room sent his heart racing, palms sweating, and thoughts scattering like leaves in an autumn breeze. Yet, love's path was not smooth. Mr. Spenlow's disapproving frown cast a shadow over their budding romance. David's modest means seemed a mountain to climb, but climb he would, for Dora's sake. He redoubled his efforts, working tirelessly to prove his worth and secure a future worthy of his beloved. In quiet moments, David began to write stories, pouring his hopes, dreams, and observations of London life onto paper. Each published piece felt like a step closer to the life he envisioned with Dora, a tangible proof of his growing success and maturity. As the days turned to weeks and months, David's love for Dora deepened, even as he began to see her limitations. Her inability to manage a household or grasp practical matters might have given a more experienced man pause, but to David, these were mere trifles compared to the joy she brought him. Still, a small voice of doubt whispered in the back of his mind, a voice he promptly silenced with memories of Dora's laugh. This first serious romantic entanglement marked a crucial stage in David's emotional journey. Like a sapling reaching for the sun, he grew in his understanding of love. Even as his naivety in matters of the heart became apparent, the complexities of adult relationships, with their blend of passion and practicality, were lessons he was only beginning to learn. As David walked home one evening, lost in thoughts of Dora and his future, the cacophony of London's streets suddenly seemed to fade away. His eyes, drawn as if by some unseen force, locked onto a face in the crowd. His heart skipped a beat, recognition dawning like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. Who could this familiar face be, and what would their appearance mean for David's carefully constructed new life? The cacophony of London streets faded into a dull roar as David's eyes locked onto a familiar face in the crowd. His heart skipped a beat, recognition dawning like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. There, amidst the sea of strangers, stood James Steerforth, his old school friend. Steerforth's easy charm and sophisticated air set him apart from the throng of Londoners rushing about their day. His smile, as bright and inviting as ever, lit up his face as he caught sight of David. In an instant, the years melted away, and they were schoolboys again, sharing secrets and dreams. Their reunion was a whirlwind of laughter and shared memories. David found himself swept up in Steerforth's magnetic presence, hanging on every word as his friend regaled him with tales of his adventures. The warmth of nostalgia wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket, and David felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced since leaving Salem House. Eager to show off his worldly friend, David decided to introduce Steerforth to the Peggotty family during a visit to Yarmouth. The journey from London to the coastal town was filled with anticipation, the rhythmic clacking of the train wheels matching the excited beating of David's heart. As they stepped off the train in Yarmouth, the salty sea air enveloped them, carrying with it the promise of home and hearth. The creaking of boats in the harbor provided a familiar soundtrack as they made their way to the Peggotty's cottage. The cozy dwelling, with its upturned boat roof, stood as a testament to the family's ingenuity and resilience. Inside, the cottage was alive with warmth and laughter. Little Emily, Mr. Peggotty's niece, moved about the space with a grace that caught Steerforth's eye. Her laughter, like tinkling bells, filled the air, and David couldn't help but notice the way Steerforth's gaze lingered on her. But beneath Steerforth's polished exterior lurked something darker. His smiles held hidden meanings, his charm a weapon wielded with precision. Like a spider spinning its web, Steerforth began to weave his influence around the unsuspecting Emily, his intentions masked by his easy manner and quick wit. Days turned to weeks, and the unthinkable happened. Emily, engaged to the loyal and loving Ham, fell prey to Steerforth's seduction. In the dead of night, with only the moon as witness, they fled together, leaving behind shattered hearts and broken dreams. The news hit the Peggotty family like a tidal wave, washing away their happiness and leaving only devastation in its wake. Mr. Peggotty's weathered face crumpled in anguish, deep lines etching themselves into his skin as he grappled with the loss of his beloved niece. Ham stood silent, his pain too deep for words, his eyes vacant and unseeing. The cottage, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with sobs and unanswered questions. The very walls seemed to absorb the family's grief, the air heavy with sorrow and disbelief. David, caught in the eye of this emotional storm, was racked with guilt. His mind replayed every interaction, wondering how he could have been so blind to Steerforth's true nature. The weight of his unwitting role in this tragedy pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. Each breath felt like a betrayal, knowing that his friend had brought such pain to those he held dear. But from the ashes of this betrayal rose a determination as fierce as the sea itself. Mr. Peggotty, his eyes burning with a father's love, vowed to find Emily and bring her home. With nothing but a worn coat and an unshakable resolve, he set out on a journey that would take him across the vast expanse of Europe. As Mr. Peggotty's figure disappeared on the horizon, those left behind grappled with the aftermath. Ham, once full of life and joy, now moved through his days like a ghost, his heart as empty as the space where Emily used to be. The village whispered and stared, their judgment a constant reminder of what had been lost. For David, the world had shifted on its axis. The golden image of Steerforth he once held dear lay shattered at his feet. In its place stood a harsh reality, a lesson in the complexities of human nature and the dangers of blind trust. As he watched Ham's silent suffering and felt the absence of Mr. Peggotty's booming laugh, David's innocence slipped away, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of the adult world. The search for Emily became a thread woven through the fabric of their lives, a constant reminder of love's endurance and the hope for redemption. As the days passed, this event remained a turning point, its ripples touching each character and shaping the course of their journey through life's turbulent waters. As David grappled with the weight of recent events, his mind drifted to thoughts of Dora, the young woman who had captured his heart. Her sweet smile and gentle nature offered a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had descended upon his world. Little did he know that fate had more surprises in store, and that love would soon lead him down an unexpected path. Love conquered all as David and Dora joined hands in holy matrimony. Their wedding day was a joyous affair, filled with the warm embraces of friends and family who gathered to celebrate their union. The church bells rang out across the city, their melodious chimes carried on a gentle breeze that rustled through the trees lining the streets. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting a kaleidoscope of colors over the beaming couple as they exchanged vows. Dora, resplendent in white lace, her cheeks flushed with happiness, looked every bit the blushing bride. David, dapper in his tailcoat, couldn't take his eyes off her, his heart swelling with love and promise. As they stepped out of the church, a shower of rose petals rained down upon them, the sweet scent mingling with the crisp air of new beginnings. Laughter and cheers echoed around them, a joyous cacophony that seemed to lift them up and carry them forward into their new life together. The newlyweds' happiness knew no bounds as they embarked on their shared journey, their hearts overflowing with hope and affection. Their small home became a sanctuary of love, filled with stolen kisses and whispered endearments. Each morning, David would wake to the sight of Dora's golden curls spread across the pillow, her peaceful face making his heart skip a beat. But as the days melted into weeks, the rose-tinted glasses of romance began to slip, revealing the stark realities of married life. The once pristine kitchen became a battlefield where Dora waged war against stubborn meats that refused to cook properly. The acrid smell of burnt food often wafted through the house, a pungent reminder of her struggles. "Oh, David," Dora would cry, her blue eyes brimming with tears as she held up yet another charred offering. "I've ruined dinner again. I'm so sorry." David, ever the optimist, would wrap his arms around her trembling form. "It's all right, my love," he'd soothe, kissing her forehead. "We'll learn together." But the challenges extended beyond the kitchen. The ledger books, with their endless columns of numbers, became Dora's nemesis. She'd sit at the desk, brow furrowed in concentration, her delicate fingers smudged with ink as she struggled to make sense of their finances. David, driven by love and a desire to see his wife succeed, took it upon himself to guide her. "My dear," he'd say gently, placing his hand over hers, "perhaps if we go over the household accounts together, you'll find it easier to manage our expenses." But his well-meaning attempts at education were often met with trembling lips and glistening eyes. Dora's shoulders would slump under the weight of her perceived inadequacies, her voice barely a whisper as she replied, "I'm trying, David. I truly am." As the months wore on, the gap between David's expectations and the reality of their situation grew wider. The home he had imagined, a haven of domestic bliss and intellectual companionship, seemed as elusive as a mirage in the desert. Yet, despite the frustrations and disappointments, their love for each other remained a constant, a flickering flame that refused to be extinguished by the winds of adversity. Then, like a thunderbolt from a clear sky, tragedy struck. Dora's delicate frame, which had always seemed too fragile for this harsh world, was racked with pain as she suffered a miscarriage. The loss of their unborn child cast a dark shadow over their home, as tangible as the silence that now filled the nursery they had begun to prepare. David watched helplessly as his beloved wife grew weaker day by day. He tended to her with unwavering devotion, his heart breaking a little more with each labored breath she took. The vibrant, carefree girl he had fallen in love with was fading away before his eyes, like a beautiful flower wilting in the harsh light of reality. Nights became an endless vigil, with David sitting by Dora's bedside, holding her hand as she tossed and turned in fitful sleep. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the darkness that seemed to be creeping into their lives. As Dora's life ebbed away, David found himself trapped in a maelstrom of emotions. Grief, regret, and a gnawing sense of guilt threatened to overwhelm him. He questioned every decision, every crossroad that had led them to this point. Had his expectations been too high? Had he pushed too hard in his attempts to change her? In her final moments, Dora's eyes, though dimmed by illness, still held the same adoration for David they had always possessed. With her last breath, she whispered words of love, leaving David alone in a world that suddenly seemed devoid of color and warmth. The silence that followed was deafening. David stood by the window, watching as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that Dora would have loved. The beauty of it all seemed a cruel joke now, a stark contrast to the emptiness he felt inside. As night fell, David's grief gave way to a restless energy. He paced the floor of their once happy home, now filled with memories that cut like shards of glass. His mind raced with thoughts of what could have been, what should have been. The weight of loss pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. But even as he grappled with his sorrow, a storm was brewing on the horizon. In the quaint town of Canterbury, winds of change were stirring, ready to expose long-hidden secrets and shatter the facade of respectability. Little did David know that his personal tragedy was about to collide with a tempest that would shake the very foundations of his world. David's heart ached with a personal loss, and that weighed heavily upon him. Meanwhile, in the quaint town of Canterbury, a storm was brewing, ready to expose long-hidden secrets and shatter the facade of respectability. The cobblestone streets of Canterbury echoed with hushed whispers, the air thick with tension. Passers-by huddled close, their voices low as they shared the latest gossip. At the center of it all was Uriah Heep, a man whose true nature was unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater. For years, Heep had wormed his way into the life of Mr. Wickfield, a once respected lawyer. Now Wickfield was a shadow of his former self, his eyes clouded by drink and his shoulders hunched with the weight of his mistakes. Heep's influence had spread like poison, seeping into every aspect of Wickfield's business and fortune. But Heep's ambition knew no bounds. He had set his sights beyond the Wickfields, ensnaring David's beloved Aunt Betsy in his web of deceit. The very thought of it made David's blood boil, his fists clenching at his sides as he walked the familiar streets of Canterbury. With determination etched on his face, David joined forces with his loyal friend Traddles in the eccentric Mr. Micawber. The unlikely trio began their investigation, pulling at the threads of Heep's deception like unraveling a complex tapestry. Micawber, despite his own perpetual financial woes, threw himself into the task with unexpected vigor. His usual jovial demeanor was replaced by a steely resolve, his eyes glinting with the promise of justice. "My dear Copperfield," he declared, his voice low and intense, "we shall unmask this villain if it's the last thing I do." As they delved deeper, the true extent of Heep's crimes came to light. Forged documents lay scattered across desks, each one a damning piece of evidence. The cooked books told a tale of greed and deceit that made David's stomach churn. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air, like the oppressive humidity before a thunderstorm. The day of reckoning arrived with the force of a thunderclap. In a room crackling with tension, Micawber stood tall, his usual flamboyance replaced by quiet dignity. With trembling hands, he presented the evidence, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. The assembled crowd watched in stunned silence as Heep's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Heep's transformation was as sudden as it was terrifying. Gone was the simpering, humble facade, replaced by a snarling, cornered beast. His eyes, once downcast in false modesty, now blazed with hatred and fear. He spat venomous denials and threats, but each one fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Traddles, his legal mind sharp as a razor, methodically dismantled Heep's defenses. With each point, Heep seemed to shrink, his power evaporating like morning mist under the harsh light of truth. The room held its collective breath as justice, long delayed, finally arrived with the swiftness of a guillotine's fall. In the aftermath, a sense of relief washed over Canterbury like a cleansing rain. Mr. Wickfield, emerging from the fog of alcohol and manipulation, blinked in the sunlight of his restored reputation. His daughter Agnes, her gentle face lined with years of worry, finally allowed herself to smile, free from Heep's oppressive shadow. As Heep was led away in chains, his hunched figure a stark contrast to his former swagger, David felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a profound sadness for the damage done and the years lost. Yet as he looked at the faces of his friends, Traddles beaming with pride, Micawber puffed up with well-deserved satisfaction, and Agnes' eyes shining with newfound hope, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest. This victory, hard-won and bittersweet, stood as a testament to the power of friendship and the triumph of honesty over deceit. As the sun set over Canterbury, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, David realized that this chapter of their lives had closed, but the bonds forged in adversity would endure, stronger than ever before. But as the dust settled and the initial euphoria of victory faded, a new tension began to creep in. The downfall of Uriah Heep had sent ripples through the lives of all involved, and David couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. As he gazed out over the twilight-bathed town, a chill ran down his spine. What new challenges lay ahead? And how would their lives change in the wake of this momentous event? The downfall of Uriah Heep sent shockwaves through the lives of many. In its aftermath, several characters found themselves at crossroads, their futures suddenly uncertain and brimming with possibility. London's streets buzzed with whispers of Heep's disgrace, the news spreading like wildfire through cobblestone alleys and grand avenues alike. Amidst this tumult, Mr. Micawber stood tall, his chest puffed out with pride. The man's eyes sparkled with a newfound purpose, his usual disheveled appearance somehow more dignified. "My dear," he declared to his ever-patient wife, his voice ringing with excitement, "Australia beckons." Mrs. Micawber's eyes widened, a mix of shock and anticipation crossing her face. The Micawber children, caught up in their parents' enthusiasm, began to chatter excitedly about kangaroos and vast open spaces. As the Micawbers' home erupted into a flurry of activity, packing and planning for their grand adventure, David Copperfield found himself adrift in a sea of grief. The loss of Dora had left a gaping wound in his heart, one that seemed to throb with each passing day. The familiar sights and sounds of London, once a source of comfort and inspiration, now felt suffocating. David wandered the city streets, his footsteps heavy and purposeless. The laughter from nearby pubs, the calls of street vendors, the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, all of it seemed to mock his sorrow. With each step, the weight of his grief pressed down upon him until he felt he could bear it no longer. In a moment of desperate clarity, David made a decision. He would travel, seek solace in the unfamiliar, and perhaps find himself along the way. The very thought of leaving London behind sent a thrill of anticipation through him, mingled with a twinge of fear. Europe unfolded before David like a vibrant tapestry. The snow-capped peaks of Switzerland pierced the sky, their majesty both humbling and inspiring. David found himself breathless as he stood atop a mountain, the crisp air filling his lungs. The vastness of the world spread out before him. For the first time since Dora's passing, he felt truly alive. In Italy, ancient ruins whispered tales of bygone eras, their weathered stones a testament to the passage of time. David ran his fingers along crumbling columns, feeling the weight of history beneath his touch. The warm Italian sun kissed his skin, and he found himself smiling more often, the burden of his grief lightening with each passing day. As David wandered these foreign lands pen in hand, he found his writer's voice growing stronger, more assured. Words flowed from him like a river, describing the sights, sounds, and smells of his travels. The scratch of his pen on paper became a comforting rhythm, a constant companion on his journey. But it was in the quiet moments, when the world fell away, that David's thoughts inevitably turned to Agnes Wickfield, her gentle smile, her unwavering support. They had been constants in his life, as steady and true as the North Star. With each passing day, a realization began to take root in David's heart, growing stronger with each beat. His love for Agnes was not a fleeting fancy or a passing infatuation. It was a love that had been there all along, patient and enduring, waiting for him to recognize its depth. This epiphany struck David like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the landscape of his heart. He saw now the difference between the passionate, tumultuous love he had felt for Dora and the steady, nurturing love he held for Agnes. As David grappled with these newfound emotions, news from home reached him like echoes from a distant shore. Each letter brought tidings that tugged at his heartstrings, reminding him of the ties that bound him to England. The most shocking news came on a dreary afternoon in Paris. David sat in a small cafe, rain pattering against the windows, when he opened a letter that would change everything. Steerforth, his old school friend, had perished in a violent shipwreck off the coast of Yarmouth. David's hands shook as he read the words, the cafe around him fading away. He could almost hear the roar of the storm, see the angry froth of the waves as they claimed their victims. The tragedy didn't end there. Ham, brave and loyal to the last, had lost his life in a valiant attempt to rescue Steerforth from the merciless waves. David's heart ached for the loss of these two men, so different in nature, yet bound together in their final moments. The image haunted his dreams, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. He found himself walking the streets of Paris in a daze, the city's beauty dulled by his sorrow. Yet amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged. Little Emily, long lost and much lamented, had finally been found. Mr. Peggotty, his face etched with relief and joy, had made the decision to take her to Australia. There, far from the judgmental eyes of society, they could start anew, the slate wiped clean by the vast expanse of the ocean. As David absorbed these tales of loss and redemption, he felt a shift within himself. The pieces of his life, scattered by grief and uncertainty, began to fall into place. With each step on foreign soil, each word penned in his journal, David felt himself growing stronger, more assured. The time had come to return to England. David's heart quickened at the thought, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through his veins. He was no longer the lost, grieving man who had fled his homeland. He returned with a newfound sense of purpose, his love for Agnes burning bright and true in his chest. As the ship approached the familiar shores of England, David stood at the rail, the salty sea breeze ruffling his hair. The future, once shrouded in mist, now stretched before him, full of promise and possibility. Yet as the coastline grew clearer, a seed of doubt took root in his mind. What if Agnes didn't share his feelings? What if he had realized his love too late? With each beat of the waves against the ship's hull, David's anticipation grew, mingled with a fear that threatened to overwhelm him. David's heart swelled with love for Agnes as he returned to England. Uncertainty clouded his mind, for he knew not if she reciprocated his feelings. The familiar streets of London welcomed him back, their cobblestones echoing beneath his feet like old friends. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and fresh bread, a heady mixture that stirred memories of his youth. As he made his way to Agnes's home, each step felt like a thunderous beat of his racing heart. Memories flooded his mind, vivid and bittersweet. He saw Agnes as a young girl, her kind eyes offering comfort in his darkest hours. He remembered her steady presence through the years, a beacon of hope and strength. Now as a man, he yearned for her in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. The door to Agnes's home loomed before him, a portal to his future. David's hand trembled as he reached for the knocker. The sound reverberated through the house, each echo matching the frantic rhythm of his pulse. Agnes appeared, her face a canvas of surprise and joy. "David!" she exclaimed, her voice as warm and welcoming as he remembered. Words failed him for a moment as he drank in the sight of her. Then, like a dam breaking, his confession spilled forth. "Agnes, I love you," he blurted, his voice raw with emotion. "I've loved you for so long, I can scarcely remember a time when I didn't." Time seemed to stand still as he waited for her response. The world narrowed to Agnes's face, her eyes widening, filling with tears that glimmered like stars. "Oh, David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've loved you too, all these years. I never dared hope." Their embrace was like coming home after a long journey. David marveled at how perfectly they fit together, as if they were two halves of a whole finally reunited. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, nature itself seeming to celebrate their union. The small chapel was adorned with wildflowers, their sweet fragrance filling the air. As they exchanged vows, David felt a sense of rightness settle over him, as if every step of his life had led him to this moment. In the years that followed, their love only deepened. David's career as an author flourished, his books touching hearts and minds across the country. He poured his experiences into his writing, creating characters that leapt off the page, alive with hopes and fears. Their home became a haven of love and laughter. The patter of little feet and the sound of children's giggles filled the rooms. David and Agnes embraced parenthood with open hearts, creating a world of bedtime stories, family picnics, and shared dreams. Aunt Betsy and Mr. Dick were frequent visitors, their presence adding a delightful touch of eccentricity to the household. Betsy's sharp wit kept everyone on their toes, while Mr. Dick's gentle nature endeared him to the children. David's dear friend Traddles found his own happiness, marrying his beloved Sophie. The two couples often gathered together, their friendship a testament to the enduring power of loyalty and shared experiences. News from Australia brought tidings of joy. The Micawbers, once plagued by financial troubles, had found success in their new land. Mr. Peggotty and Emily, too, had carved out a peaceful existence, healing old wounds and embracing new beginnings. As David reflected on his journey, he marveled at the twists and turns that had brought him to this point. From a vulnerable orphan to a man surrounded by love and success, he had weathered storms and emerged stronger. The faces of those who had shaped his life danced before his eyes. His gentle mother, steadfast Peggotty, formidable Aunt Betsy, and above all, Agnes, his guiding light and true love. In quiet moments, David would often gaze out the window, watching the world go by. He saw in the bustling streets and changing seasons a reflection of his own life's journey. The boy who had once felt lost and alone now stood as a man fulfilled, his heart brimming with gratitude for the love and friendship that surrounded him. As the sun set on another day, casting a warm glow over their home, David held Agnes close. Their children played at their feet, their laughter a sweet melody. In this moment of perfect contentment, David knew with certainty that every obstacle overcome and every lesson learned had led him here. In Agnes, his true angel, he had found not just a wife, but a partner, a friend, and a home for his heart. His story had come full circle, and the future stretched before them, bright with promise and love.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.